This is Auteur Detour, wherein three film lovers travel through the filmographies of cinema's most important directors in hopes of finding a greater understanding on the other side.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Auteur Detour. This is Travis, here with Ian.
Hi. Are we calling it auteur? I still say auteur.
I'm not telling people how to pronounce words. I say whatever I feel like in the moment. Any questions from you, Chris? I'm here also with Chris.
I thought it was auteur. Is that how they pronounce it in French?
I was like pronounce it in Germany.
Oh yeah.
Are we all done?
Yeah, we're good.
That's it. It's been fun. Thanks, guys. See you next episode.
I'm like the teacher who sits silently waiting for the class to calm down.
That's how I think of you.
Let's get started. Christopher Nolan's 2000 classic Memento begins, famously, at the end. We witness the protagonist Lenny's brutal killing of a man, as we come to understand, who murdered Lenny's wife. Or did he? Almost every scene in Memento is shown in reverse chronological order, leaving viewers scrambling to reassemble the puzzle pieces of the narrative and replicating in a simplified way the experience of the protagonist's mental condition. Lenny cannot make new memories. The story of Memento, based on an idea by Christopher's brother Jonah, allows Nolan to fully dig into his philosophical and phenomenological concerns about the nature of reality, time, meaning, etc., and one of his most crucial obsessions, the way filmmaking can replicate and manipulate our experience of reality. What did you guys think of the movie?
Yeah, you know what? This, for me, is just short of like a perfect movie. There's a couple things I gripe about, but my experience watching it, which is admittedly like once every several years, is a movie I come back to. I love this movie. I just like watching it unfold. If you know anything about me, I really love a good mystery. Like really movies that force you to pay close attention. And the ones you can't just move easily in and out of are the ones that I really enjoy. So the big mystery, like a Chandler-esque kind of film noir sort of film, is really what gets me going, and this is one of them. I'll probably talk more about the big issues that I have with it, but for the most part, I just really enjoy watching this movie whenever I get the opportunity to. So big thumbs up. I'm so glad we got to check this one out.
The way you said that, I just wanted to say, like, this is one of those movies where they used to show it on like HBO or one of those channels when I had cable, and like if I ever saw a moment of it, you know, like people say about like, you know, Goodfellas, or there's a lot of movies like that, but like it's definitely one of those ones where it's like if I see a moment of it, I'm just like sucked in, and you just like kind of have to watch it to the end.
Totally.
Anyway, Ian,
I think it's great. Listen.
How do you pronounce auteur? Go.
I say auteur detour. No, I think it's a great movie. I mean, I've got also things that this watch, I was probably more critical about it than I've ever been in any of my previous watches. But there's no reason to say that it's negative stuff about it right from the get-go, because I think it's a great movie. I think the performances are kind of bewilderingly good because of how difficult it is to make this kind of movie, or to perform this kind of movie for those actors. You know, I think it's kind of Nolan like doing, it's not right out the gate, you know, Following was his first, but this is his first real movie in a way to me. And like, he really came out fucking swinging. And it's like you know, it kind of does what he does better than a lot of his future movies in some ways.
I mean, I think in some ways it's like the ultimate Christopher Nolan movie, and it's like kind of like a perfect movie. Like I said, I think the structure of the story is like so perfectly suited for him to like kind of like dig into and express every idea. I mean, there's so much kind of like philosophical kind of like mumbo jumbo in like every scene. You know, he gets to like confront an aspect of reality and question it, and I think that makes the movie really like beautiful and brilliant. You can tell it's the movie of like a young man who's getting to like pour himself into his like work and like express himself like fully for the first time, and he has a lot to say, honestly, and yeah, I think it's great.
You know, the thing that you said during the intro that I feel like you left out, which is one of the big things in this movie, the big ideas in this movie that he sort of goes on in his career to just always be fascinated in, and actually in following also, is just like a big theme in this movie is just how people take advantage of each other, you know?
Yeah.
And there's so much of that in his later movies too. And watching it this time, that was one of the big takeaways for me, was just like, even Lenny takes advantage of himself. Like everybody is going to take advantage of a blank slate. And like, it's very cynical and kind of, you know, sad in that way. As sad as a Christopher Nolan movie can be, which is not very sad because there's not a lot of emotion.
Disagree.
to
There's
it.
so much emotion in this movie. You're nuts if you aren't emotionally moved by like the death of Mrs. Jenkins. But
Oh yeah. Well, oh my God, fucking Harriet Sansom Harris, man. I was not like, she's, you know.
Well, then what are you saying? Then why are you
MVP? No, I just mean, for as sad as he can get, this is as sad as he can get. Like this movie, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, that scene for sure. But she's the fucking all-star actress of all time. Like,
he is, but he assembled this cast, and I also think, you know, you mentioned how amazing the performances are. Like, let's like, I mean, if you look at the big scheme of like Christopher Nolan's films, he consistently gets incredible performances from his actors. Incredible performances from in every movie. Yeah. So I'm just saying that, like, I think the human element is like an underappreciated element of Christopher Nolan's films, and he is very cerebral, and he is very like cold in a lot of ways. But I mean, this movie compared to the last one, I found incredibly emotional. Like I was I was upset at various times. Like you said, it's incredibly sad.
Yeah, and it's, I don't know. I think the thing that keeps me at arm's reach from getting incredibly emotionally invested is that this movie really introduces the thing into his filmography of just like, it comes out of the gate as the actors telling you what's happening in the movie, and like it just keeps going for the entire movie. Like it never stops telling you what's happening in the movie, you know? And it's like at times it feels like somebody telling you their dream, you know, where you're just kind of like, okay, oh wow, yeah, that's great. You know, you're just like listening to somebody be like, and then this is gonna happen, and then this happened, and you're like, okay, yeah, and like it doesn't show. I mean, it does show it, but like, you know, it's telling you like with dialogue.
Well, you know, I think what this one actually seems, I kind of disagree in that. One of my biggest critiques of Nolan, I think we've talked about this before, is his absolute like exposition dumps. Like Inception is just like everyone unload exposition onto the Ariadne character. Like let's explain. I think he really did, watching it this time and knowing what happens in it, like looking for the way in which the plot is being explained, because it's incredibly potentially confusing. Like really, there's all this stuff going on. There's black and white scenes that are supposed to represent forward chronological order. The color scenes, of course, are told sort of in chunks that go backwards, right? I thought he did a pretty solid job of not over-explaining, like the way he kind of cleverly uses the front desk guy, for example. He's like, he's pretending to talk with him for the first time. And he's like, oh, no, I'm sorry, just messing with you, dude, but it's so weird, right. You know? It's kind of a clever way to get this, because obviously he's like repeating himself over and over again, but
those are the color scenes, like the front desk guy. You know, the black and white scenes are the exposition dumps. Like those are the scenes that are just him coming in every other scene to be like, tell you what the fuck you're supposed to know about this world that he's created, you know? Like, and it is in that same Inception way of just, I mean, Inception was sort of the ultimate of it, of just like, just telling you the whole movie, what's happening.
But they don't explain a lot. Speaking of the guy at the front desk, what the hell was that beard?
Dude, intense.
I need an explanation of that beard, that facial hair.
I sometimes get there.
It was disgusting.
He like moonlights as a metal band bassist, you know.
That's
when
the
he's
only
not...
explanation. Yeah.
He uses that guy later too, you know.
Yep.
He's got the beard.
Totally.
He's like, the beard is in my rider.
That guy is in like 95 films he just credited. And I had to look him up. I'm like, this guy is so familiar, but I can't pinpoint almost anything he's in except for the Nolan movies. He's literally credited with like 95 movies. I'm like, well, good for you. And he's got that beard in almost every one of them, I think.
See him and cannot think, you know, your kids don't like falafel or whatever it is, you know, like that's just
that was his shining moment in cinema history for sure. Being held upside down by Batman. Also, I mean, I think you guys both have kind of like nailed it. He does explain so much on screen. I don't have a problem with it at all. It's really fun for me to hear all that stuff and to kind of like get into the world of the movie. I feel I love movies that like, you know, can do that visually, but like the more the better. You can show me stuff, you can tell me stuff, you can add color and kind of like contrasting feelings with the music. Like I'm sort of like, why leave anything out? It's a movie. You can pack it in. But wait, I want to say one more thing, which is that Nolan does have it wouldn't work if he was telling you stuff that you didn't need to know. But I feel like he is very, very particular about what he gives you and what he doesn't give you. I mean, the fact that he can, again, tell this movie backwards, tell an incredibly complicated story, and make it all work to like general audiences, like is a testament to how skilled he is at like giving you what you need and like nothing more, but making sure that you have everything that you require to like be satisfied with the story. And like one thing stuck out to me as like a great example of like the way he respects the audience, which is like when he's on the phone hiring like an escort, and he's like, I want a brunette. Oh, right. Or no, he doesn't even say that. He just says, I guess a blonde's fine.
Yeah, blonde's
And then
fine.
he's like,
that's what they say.
Yeah, that's what they say. And you're like, oh, he just said blondes have more fun on the other end of the line.
Totally.
And it's like, it makes you feel like clever for figuring it out because he doesn't like spoon feed it to you. And I guess that's what I'm saying. Just the fact that he sets up this world, he gives you the information, but he knows that you're going to like be able to like add 2 and 2 together and figure out the rest of it.
No, totally.
But you are racing to keep up with the story he's telling. Anyway, go ahead, Chris.
And I totally agree with that, especially with this movie. The main concern I have, though, with respect to exposition is you mentioned giving everyone just what they need. And I think that my number one problem with this movie is the ending. And there's certain movies that you watch where if you didn't see it coming, you can watch the end and then maybe check it out again and go, oh, I should have seen all of this. All of it was there, laid out from the beginning, like Fight Club or The Sixth Sense or even Hereditary, right? If you'd really paid attention, you could have put it all together. This movie, I think my biggest gripe is he puts little things in, but the ending, he basically lays it all right there in your lap without you being able to put that all together. There's information that was withheld until the very, very end that kind of ties it all together that I probably took issue with. If there was a way, and granted, I'm not a film writer, so he made an amazing movie with a really unusual way of developing the plot. So I'm not sure how he would have done this differently. But if he could have sprinkled in little seeds, like say that shot of Sammy Jenkins in the medical ward where someone passes by the camera and for a split second Sammy turns into Leonard. Little seeds like that, but it's kind of just given to us all at the very end. And it's kind of unsatisfying in a way because it's not like I put the mystery together. He just gives us the ending. And it's like, oh, gotcha. That's what really happens. He is Sammy Jenkins, sort of.
I think I'm with you. I think that the idea that he's working with isn't, I mean, let me try to put this in a different way. He's more fascinated with telling a story of an unreliable narrator and having that be the takeaway from it. Like if you're a film lover, then like the big reveal is that you couldn't trust him all along. You know what I mean? Like that the narrator that's telling you this story was full of shit himself.
And there is a big clue in that, which is that what are the chances that he would be investigating somebody with that condition and then hit his head and get the exact same condition when it's like this insanely rare condition that like no one has. You could look at that also though as like a plot hole that you just kind of ignore, which I think is another phenomenon that Christopher Nolan is like very interested in, like putting plot holes in movies that like he knows that people won't
this movie has insane plot holes. I mean, as tight as it is, there's incredible plot holes.
And again, I think he knows that there's plot holes and like loves that he's getting away with them. I think that is like a sick fetish of Christopher Nolan's. And we'll get into that more in some of the later films. But he enjoys.
I mean, the biggest one.
He enjoys pulling one over on the audience. But what do you got, Ian?
Ebert wrote, it's like, it's unkind to question the plot hole device or whatever. Let's just watch it. Like, unkind, I thought that was a great
It's
way to put
rude.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I get that.
Respect
I
the
mean,
filmmaker.
I agree, because it is, he's doing an exercise. This movie especially is an exercise for Christopher Nolan. Like, it's the fact, this is one of the thoughts that I had, and it's a question. I don't want you to jump down my throat, because I know that, Travis, you probably will. But I had to question, like, would this movie be better without this gimmick? Like, that it was filmed backwards or edited backwards, Because
No.
there is like a just conceit, that this guy is a complete blank slate and he has to solve a mystery, right? And everybody's taking advantage of him, so he doesn't know who to trust. And like that, and then it turns out at the end, like even if the plot was exactly the same, the way that it was written, like it was written, start to finish. It wasn't written the way that it was edited. He edited it all afterward. The plot, like the way that it was written, was start to finish. So if he had filmed that movie and not done this sort of editing gimmick, it would have been a less interesting movie for sure. That's why this is a question. And it wouldn't have this cultural relevance that it has. But like, I think as like a movie, like as like a fun movie to watch, I think it could have been like a better mystery, like and a more satisfying mystery.
I mean, there is a DVD extra that allows you to watch it, I think, in chronological order. But I think from what I heard, someone's like, it kind of highlights some of the inconsistencies and it makes it better. You appreciate the original one because, there's not filmed
I wish
way.
that they would put all those fucking DVD extras and commentaries. Somebody needs to just have like a website that's just that stuff. Because of like a streaming site or something, because it's so sad that we don't have those commentary tracks and those like re-edits that were on DVDs and Blu-rays. Like,
Ian, I'm not even going to justify that with a response. Like
you just did.
Part of what makes art great is like seeing someone accomplish something incredible. Like when you can witness something that like is just someone who is like a master of something, like orchestrate it, like seeing an incredible performance. And like that is what Christopher Nolan is doing in this movie. Like, he's just manipulating you so beautifully. It's like he's conducting like an opera of manipulation on you, or like a composer. I also have a problem with the ending, or I did the first time I watched it, which was just that I felt it was too pat. Like I called it like I said it was like a puzzle in my introduction, and I feel like a lot of Christopher Nolan movies are like that, right? Where he sets up all these pieces and kind of plays around with them in front of you and then puts them together at the end, and you're like, okay. Those kind of stories aren't as satisfying to me, like you said, Chris, as a movie where you get a bunch of pieces and you have to put them together. And maybe they don't all fit together, but you're creating something in your mind and you have the satisfaction of coming up with a conclusion or an idea yourself. Like Stanley Kubrick famously said, I think, like, a movie can never be as satisfying if you tell the audience what to think, as opposed to like giving them a story and like letting them kind of reach the conclusions. And that's why there's kind of like, I think, a central mystery in a lot of his films. And a filmmaker I think of, like, the movie that I saw actually right after I saw this one in theaters was Mulholland Drive. And that was a mystery to me that was so much more like exciting and fascinating because it didn't have like an answer at the end.
Mhm.
And
Right.
that was like way more thrilling to me, way more interesting to me. And when I was watching Memento, I mean, when you see these like grisly, bloody photographs and weird things popping up, and you're like, oh God, what is like the horrible secret at the end of this movie? And it's just like, oh, he killed a couple other guys for this cop. And it's like, okay, like, I guess I get it. Like, it just seemed
Right.
very clean and neat at the end in a way that I didn't appreciate. Upon rewatch, I like it more and more and more. Like, you know what I mean? I can like appreciate it for what it is. But I do, of all the kind of critiques of this film, that's the one that I kind of like agree with the most. Just that it's
This
like
movie
too
also
clean.
deals with this. Well, I don't know. It kind of ties in, but that he is still fascinated with, as he was in Following, with this sort of duality, like person, because Leonard is two people. Like he's Leonard before he was brain damaged, and then he's Lenny afterward, and he kind of like is fascinated with like these two people that live inside the same person and like how they react off of one another. And like I really appreciated that this time. And he throws you like kind of explicit stuff about that with Joe Pantoliano being like, you know, that's who you were, that's not who you are, you don't know who you are, you know, like that kind of stuff. But like in reference to you saying, you know, he finds out that he killed a couple people, like, you know, for this cop kind of thing, like, but this suit wearing sort of spiky haired like sports car driving version of himself that like isn't the same person that he was, and like how they're living in the same body. I don't know, I think that was kind of interesting. I want to watch for more of that, because that's obviously, we talked about that in Following, how like there's a read of that where they're, you know, kind of the same person, or like a fracture of his brain.
Well, you know, Lenny and Teddy, those two names are so similar. And Teddy also is two people too, right? He's the Teddy figure who exists just for Lenny, and then he's also a cop named, you know, John Gamble or whatever.
John Gamble.
And
then there's a lot of that too, like Johnny, Jimmy. He's like, says like James, John G. It's like, no, James doesn't stand for John.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, the thing of the double is like very important, and also just like identity being based on, you know, action or time or whatever, rather than like an immutable kind of characteristic. And I think that, you know, Ian, you mentioned last time Christopher Nolan's movies being like bro-y, and I really agree with that. and like not, and I don't think that's like a critique. I think he is like a man, like out of England, the you know, world center of lad culture, where like the role of men, I don't know, he's questioning, like I wrote that, you know, I feel like he's examining modes of masculinity at their most vulnerable and unstable in all these movies. He often like makes movies about these like young guys that are like searching for meaning in the world, right? I you know, the incredible like parallels between Following and Batman Begins, where it's like you're taken by this mentor, you're manipulated, you know, but basically what you realize in this moment is that your identity is not immutable, and you're, you know, you mean you can find yourself when you realize that like identity is something that you can choose, like you can will yourself to be a certain way. And in this movie and in the Batman movies, you put on a suit and you basically pretend to be a thing, you know. And I think that's really interesting, that this is like this recurring motif of like the guy who has a suit, but then underneath there's something maybe weirder or different, you know, or there's something that's not fully formed. And when he takes the suit off, and she's like, you don't seem like the type, you know, like to have tattoos, and it's like, well, he's a fractured person, but all the characters are. And I think it's interesting that, you know, these are the kind of movies that like guys in dorm rooms are really into. You know what I mean? Guys who are at the moment that are defining themselves looked at these movies and they're like, that's, you know, that speaks to me so strongly, you know?
Well, I have to say though, like, I really appreciate the generosity of like that, because it's giving him credit for something that he's definitely doing, maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously, but it's there. But I think that like the broiness also comes from the amount of bros that watch his movies and are just like, no, dude, you don't get it, dude. It's this thing, dude. And like, they just think that they're hella smart because they get it. But he's kind of spoon feeding it to him also. Like, none of his movies are very smart. Like, they're well crafted and brilliant in their way, but they aren't like, you have to fucking know shit about the past, like in filmmaking or something, to understand it. Like, it's all right there on the screen for the most part. And people, especially bro-y dudes who like, you know, think of themselves as sort of like the smart guy in their group, love to watch his movies and be like, no, dude, when he said that, he meant this, bro. Like, it's like, and that shit bothers me. Like, that's what bothers, it's his audience. It's not his fault that that happens. But definitely that group has clung to his movies as like, you know, people have said it a million times. He's like smart movies for dumb people. Like, that's kind of what he's been painted with.
Yeah, and I kind of agree, just in the sense that it's like, I don't think it's like a byproduct of what he does, which is again, take really smart ideas and make really compelling films that make you feel smart. Like I was saying, it makes you feel smart when you're leaning in and you're getting all the clues and you're putting it all together. But he knows you're gonna put it together. He's giving you just enough, and he knows you have to watch it a second time to get all of it, and then you're gonna feel even smarter.
And part of it that is because it's like, you know, he can't choose who his audience is going to be, like, necessarily. But part of that is that he's one of the only filmmakers, maybe like him, James Cameron. You know, we talked about the Wachowskis last week. Like, there's a few of them, but there's only a few that are making movies with this kind of budget that are completely, I mean, Batman aside, completely original IP that are like blockbuster movies that you don't have this preconceived notion going into. And like, people that are going to see big blockbusters, you're going to get a lot of bros, obviously, you know, so it's just going to happen that way, I'm sure. If he was making all movies like Memento, it would be more probably film nerds that are like dissecting his movies more, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's only one of his movies that he didn't write at all, right? Which is the next one we're going to watch, Insomnia, if I recall. Like, at least him and his brother, I don't think he wrote, which has a different feel to it. We'll talk about that later. But what I was going to say was, Travis, you touched on something that I wrote down, two things, actually. A common thread kind of between his main characters. I wrote the main character who's obsessed with an idea or an obsession that leads him down like a dangerous path, which is kind of piggybacking on what you said. So, you know, Leonard obviously is obsessed with finding his wife's killer and following. He's obsessed with following people, right? And that gets him in trouble. I mean, Hugh Jackman's obsessed with figuring out the trick in Prestige. You know, everyone's got this obsession. Cobb's obsessed with his deceased wife. It's like the obsession kind of drives the main character. And obviously everyone needs a motive, but it's like this, they're haunted by something, you know, and he loves the idea of like the tortured protagonist, if you will, right?
Well, he loves the idea of like the lost protagonist who then creates meaning through a purpose. And like, you know, he says when he's on the phone talking to we don't know who, and he's explaining why Sammy Jenkins wasn't able to, like, you know, kind of didn't make it out of his condition, but he is going to make it out of his condition. He is going to like thrive in the world in spite of his condition. He said that Sammy Jenkins had no drive, no reason to make it work. And that's where he was different. And that's what, you know, his obsession basically gave him purpose, and it was going to like give him meaning in the state he was in. I mean, that kind of says it right there. Like, with or without his wife being dead, like, he needed that purpose to like be able to live in the world in his condition. Right. You know what I mean? Like, he wouldn't, if he wasn't struggling with that mental condition, like, you know, maybe he could just get by, like, not caring that much. But yeah. Ian?
I was just going to make a stupid joke. I want to make like a sound effect for every time we say wife dead over this series of Christopher Nolan movies. Just a little ding or something.
Another theme, another important theme, yeah.
It's there throughout.
Well, I was also going to mention you said it, but he's obsessed with main characters, always male, in suits. Literally, like, almost every single main character his main outfit is a suit, or at least a business suit type deal, or in the case of Interstellar, like a space suit, or Batman who wears a suit and a literal bat suit. You know, he just loves that idea. It's not, you know, necessarily indicative of anything, but it's funny how commonly this comes up.
Oh, it definitely is indicative of something. I mean, he, like, the characters literally like are like, I'm gonna put on a suit and be this person. Like, just, you know what I mean? Like, what did the guy say Cobb said in the last movie, where he's like, you know, get a haircut, put on a suit, your own mother wouldn't recognize you. It's like, he's, you know what I mean? He's basically saying you're gonna be a different person. If you put on the suit and you act a certain way, you will be a literally different person. And I think that is very important to Christopher Nolan. I think this is like, I mean, maybe I'm really into this idea of Christopher Nolan's because it's something that I feel like I believe. Like, you know, I think you can choose or will yourself to be different. You can make a choice to, like, in how you live your life and who you are. And it takes will, and it takes, like, you know, strength, but it's possible. So I really love when I see that in his movies. I really love watching that transformation.
That's a really good point about you know, putting on.
Remember, and in following specifically,
person, it is.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay, but no, you're right. I mean, that is such a huge theme in his movies, and like, yeah, I just really appreciated that, like, notice, because I hadn't really put that together. But you're right. I mean, suits like represent like his a huge theme in his movies.
Well, especially with the last two movies that we just watched. Sorry to interrupt you, Travis, but it's literally they start with, and chronologically, a regular layman's clothing, right? And then they put on the suit by which we tend to identify them, throughout the rest of the movie. So that's actually a really brilliant point, Travis.
He was wearing a flannel. Well, you kind of set me up for it, but he was wearing like a flannel, and I feel like this movie came out in 2000, but it was like kind of coming out of the 90s. It's sort of like he's going from like the grunger look to like the yuppie look, and I don't know. I was just gonna say that like, oh god, no, I lost my train of thought. No one say anything. Wait, just that. Oh yeah, just the image of it's not just him in the suit in the last movie. It's him going from I want to be a writer. I wish I was a writer, and having his like stupid typewriter, and then being like, no, I am this guy in a suit who does this and this. You know what I mean? It's like finding meaning, finding purpose, and again, I think that points to like why it's so popular amongst like college people. When you're trying to like define yourself and trying to like figure out who you are.
I think another reason why the suits are important in this movie and following, especially maybe, is like that it is a neo-noir movie, and like the noir, like part of it is sort of an updating of these suit-wearing detectives. Like his suit in this movie is very iconically distinct, and obviously it's a plot point. And I had forgotten. Because, listen, we didn't talk about it at the beginning of this episode, but like I had seen this movie a lot when it came out. I really loved it. I saw it in the theater, then it came out, and I was working at the video store, and I watched it all the time. Like I was super into it, but I haven't watched it in probably 18 years or something. Like it's been a long time, and so I had forgotten that the suit was a plot point. That it wasn't his suit that he was wearing, and when he came on in the intro and he's like wearing this way oversized suit that's kind of like fashionable but like strange, and I was like, wow, what a choice. But it like worked for me, like as a detective, as an update of a detective movie. I've been thinking a lot about how he was doing this neo-noir thing for the first 3 movies. And then he like invented like neo superhero, and then like, which he really did, he did this thing where he brought superheroes into what would it look like if a superhero existed in the 2000s, right? And that's what neo-noir did, is what would it look like if a detective existed in the 1980s or 90s, And he's so good at that. And then I even went on, as I was thinking about this, to think about like, well, even his later movies, his sci-fi movies, are really neo-sci-fi. Like they're like a mix of noir and sci-fi in a weird way. But it's like, Interstellar and Inception are both kind of very grounded, realistic versions of what it would look like if we were living in that reality,
Yeah.
And that made me think, like, maybe if I'm getting on board with Christopher Nolan, which I definitely was in this movie, like, and I can maybe hop off on the next one, but if I'm getting on board right now, like, maybe his greatest value added to film history is like this ability to update genres and like make them feel real in their in the way that he does it. Like I love the neo-noir aspect of this and the neo superhero. And then I was thinking like, maybe the next movie that I want Christopher Nolan to make is like, maybe he's the person to bring back the Universal monsters. Like, what if he fucking made a Frankenstein movie, that was like grounded in Christopher Nolan style? Like the amount of exposition he could do in a Frankenstein movie, I think he should do it.
Sure, whatever.
Why not? He did it for Batman. Why can't he do it for Frankenstein?
Somebody already said this, but like the Universal monsters are recognizable because of the specific actors and like makeup that they had.
Yeah, but they're not gonna replicate. He did that to the Joker. Travis, he did that to the Joker.
It will never be the same, and there's no point in trying.
Oh my god, you sound like everybody when Heath Ledger got
The Joker is like a comic book character that was drawn with like 3 lines, like, you know what I mean, like very ill-defined, and it changed.
No.
Anyway, whatever.
No, everybody said that when Heath Ledger got cast. They're like, he could never be the Joker. Like, we have what the Joker is, and he redefined it. There's no reason why he couldn't redefine
interested in
Frankenstein.
watching a 1,000 whatever. I'm just not. That's just not for me. But I guess I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just not interested. I'm not interested. I just feel like. Well, first of all, let me just say, I love that you're going to the Universal Monsters, because I love the Universal Monsters, and I love the idea of like them somehow getting like being popular or being in movies again in like a respectable way, as opposed to like, the Tom Cruise ones or like Van Helsing in the 2000s. So it's part of me is like tempted, like, ooh, what if they did do that? But
that's what I'm saying. Is like these are dead genres. I'm trying to.
But I don't.
My brain went to how do you revitalize a dead genre, right? Like the Western people try, and every once in a while there's a good one. That's a dead genre. I don't think Nolan is suited.
But
for
there
that.
are
Like,
horror
it's not
movies
in his
happening,
theme.
right? There are horror movies being made right now, and like and even monster.
But not these
even
classical
monster
ones.
movies. Yeah.
Not the classical kind.
Okay.
Not ones where it's like
a vampire or a Frankenstein. I get it.
or a mummy.
About.
Well, I'm sorry, it is a moot point in the end, because keep in mind, Nolan is a Warner Brothers kind of gal, and we're talking Universal, so it's off the table, fellas. I'm sorry. You can dream all you want.
Universal and Warner Brothers merged this year, motherfucker. They're one
plus
now.
Warner Brothers is and he have been like feuding over like Tenet and stuff like that. That's what I heard. But wait, I want to respond to your two things. First of all, I hope you cut out my entire response to your Universal thing. I don't want this to be just about a fight about whether he should reboot the Universal Monsters. That's not what this podcast is about. But I do want to respond to the two main points you did, which is like what was his importance in like film history in the early 2000s when he was making these films and kind of making his mark, and then the influence of like film noir on his movies. Like, first of all, the dialogue in this movie is wonderful, amazing, but it's pitched in a specifically like non-realistic way. Like it's pitched right at like you said, like a modern version of like a film noir script, right? I remember the line like, memory can change the shape of a room or the color of a car. Like, it's just like perfect stuff. Like the whole time I was just like, yes, like I love this. And I loved how much he was dumping into it.
I watched Out of the Past this week.
Oh God, what a movie! Yeah.
Before I watched this one, it's a classic. I love that movie. But I was just like, before I watched this, I wanted this watch to be closer to the recording, but I had like a few days, and I just wanted to get in the film noir mindset, so I threw that one on. And it was crazy to me how much of the like dialogue while I was watching Memento could have been in Out of the Past, like
absolutely.
you said. Like, it was really just like an update of that kind of movie, like in a beautiful way.
And then I was just gonna say, in the early 2000s, post The Matrix, and I think I've maybe even talked about this on the podcast before, like movies were getting further and further like away from reality. Like they were just like untethered by physical reality. Everything was CG. In a couple years, everything would be like 3D. And what Christopher Nolan was doing was like, bringing everything back down to earth. If you added one thing to films, to me, it's gravity. Like being impressed by just like physical reality, which is like what movies originally were all about. And then what kind of like comic book stuff like The Matrix, and then all it's kind of like the things that it influenced. Like I always think of like the Underworld series as the perfect example of this, or like the Resident Evil series, where it all just feels like candy floss. It all just feels ethereal and weightless, and he and he just brought back like the power of physical reality to movies. And
well, we'll get into Tenet like in a year when we finally review that one, but we've had differing opinions on it. But one thing that I think we all agree on, like when the fucking plane crashes, and it's a real plane crashing, as far as I know, on the screen, there's none of it. Nobody can watch that and be like, and I mean, everybody just has to say, holy shit. Like, it's an incredible feat when you watch something real happening on fucking screen.
He got the government of Scotland to agree to let him drop an entire 747 on the Scottish Highlands, like a real airplane. That's insane. Or just that scene, in Dark Knight where the Joker, like, messes up the detonators, like, hits it and the hospital blows up. Those are actual, like, explosions. And the thing actually didn't go off, Like, you can only film that one time and it works. It's so good, you know? But then you have a movie like Superman versus whoever. There was a scene where they're like flying and, you know, like they're punching each other in air. You can't feel that. Like you said, he brought gravity back. Like there's no way for us to relate to what that feels like. But we know what it does when it's actually on camera in real time.
I remember in Dark Knight when they flipped the truck over in the middle of the street, and that was a huge stunt. And this was at the same time that Michael Bay was releasing the Transformers movies, where trucks were flying in the air and like
literal
just battling.
trucks were fighting.
Yeah, and like it just again, it just was like so. And you know, he's not a talentless director, but like it just felt so insubstantial compared to like again just one truck crashing in a dramatic way. And like that is like the power of like what Christopher Nolan was kind of bringing to movies at the time in a historical sense, in a general sense.
Yeah. Part of that does include, you know, the idea of sort of updating genre, though. You know what I mean? Like it is like, I don't know, it's about grounding things. Like those movies have to be grounded. You know, all of his movies have to be grounded. Well, I mean, they don't have to be, but for them to be considered sort of neo-noir, like a neo superhero, like that was what he added to Batman and like changed superhero movies forever. He was just like, this is what it would look like if Batman really existed, you know, like, and that was new at the time. Now everything obviously does that, but like I think having the real tactic or what's the word I'm looking for? Tactile things there, and not CGI heavy, or at least not like, you know, completely fabricated CGI heavy stuff, means that you are living in the real world, which is what he wants his movies to feel like, you know? While you mentioned The Matrix, I had to bring up fucking Carrie-Anne Moss and Joe Pantoliano are so good. And I can't understand, like Joey Pants, we all love. He was in fucking Goonies. He's been around forever. I could talk about him if we want to, because he's just so charming in this movie as like a scumbag, you know? And I kind of love him. I thought he was one of the better performances in this movie.
He enlivens the movie like so much.
I love the scene when he just wants to take a different picture. What do you think that was? Is that like when he's like, no, over here, and he like moves over and he's still squinting into the light? I was like, why did he do that when he finally takes a picture of him? But I loved it. Like it just felt like weirdly real, you know?
Maybe like you didn't want to be like in front of the hotel, like where it was recognizable where he was. He just got a picture in front of like a car, like so it's a nondescript location, maybe.
Yeah. I think that might be it. But anyway, Carrie-Anne Moss, first of all, sorry for saying this because it's objectifying. She is so fucking hot. And I don't like say that lightly. Like she was so beautiful. And I'm like, what the fuck happened? Like, why does she make this, The Matrix, and, you know, a couple movies like right in this time? And then she kind of disappeared. Like she was so good. And she's a great actress. What the fuck did Hollywood do to her? Do we know?
No.
Chris, do you know?
No, no idea.
Why would you know?
But oftentimes female actresses do, you know, have kids, and then things change, and then, you know, you have to get back into your, you know, your thing, or you just want to be a parent and say, you know what, I'm good on all this.
It
so
could be that.
There's
Do
any
we know
number
that
of
she
things
had
can
kids? I
happen.
mean, I think, sadly, that it's more indicative of just what Hollywood like will give to a 36-year-old woman or something like that, like however old she was when she broke, because she didn't break until she was in her mid to late 30s, and she was kind of an action star, or at least like and you know, those movies don't come around, you know, and I think that that's probably what happened. I think also other actresses probably kind of ate her lunch, like for whatever reason, because of tabloids, like Angelina Jolie and like people that broke at the same time and kind of took off, you know?
She has almost like a sinister kind of component. I mean, especially in this movie, obviously, but she's got like a darker edginess to it that might preclude her from being like a leading lady in some execs' eyes. I don't know. I'm just kind of
I get that. I mean, I wouldn't imagine her in some of the roles that Angelina Jolie like ended up doing, but I do think that like the role, some of the, I don't know. I just think that it's weird to me that she's so good and that she kind of disappeared after this.
Yeah. That's Hollywood for you.
And you could say the same thing about Guy Pearce. I mean, he still acts and he's still in things and stuff, but what a fucking great actor. Like, he carries these scenes where, by all accounts, it's fucking him talking to himself with a phone that you can't hear even like the mumble on the other side, you know? And it's like, that is really hard to do and stay not boring, you know?
Well, did you know that those scenes are actually all ad lib? The black and white scenes that you hear, there's no script for that. Everything you hear, it kind of comes off too. He kind of mumbles and just little short bursts of speech, you know? He's like putting things together in his brain, which actually works really well if we're trying to get inside of his head, you know? I think that works well.
You're right. Those scenes are like, do feel like they're kind of inside his head, and you get a different energy from him in those scenes, where he's not composed, he's not in control, right? He's kind of sweaty and a little jittery, and like showing concern and emotion in a way that he basically does not do in all the color scenes, where he's just like, this is what I do, this is how I live, this is my condition, you know. He's kind of losing it a little bit there, and I thought that I loved the kind of the feel of those scenes compared to the other scenes, even though I think with the black and white and the ad-libbiness, and there was like a little fade in and out of those scenes that seemed a tiny bit amateurish, dare I say?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it felt a little bit
whenever
like
it
this.
went to that, I was like, oh, am I watching like, I was watching it on HBO, and I'm like, am I watching like an HBO movie right now? Like, it felt a little, you know, like you said, amateurish.
He's
like,
coming out of like this, you know, it feels like a low budget movie at times. You know what I mean? You can feel the limitations of the production at times, and even the limitations of his incredible but very nascent skills, right? Like, he's still developing into like the director that he would become. And I think there's a big change or shift that happens on Batman Begins that I want to talk about. Like, but because I feel like that's one of his most awkward movies, but I feel like there's like growing pains happening, but I think he pulls off some incredible stuff in Batman Begins. And in this movie, he pulls off incredible stuff, but there is a little bit of like a tinge of that black and white 90s indie kind of filmmaker happening in those in-between scenes.
Definitely. So, question for you guys is this: so he's from San Francisco, and a lot of the places you see, like the bar and a lot of different locations, are on streets in San Francisco, like prominent San Francisco named streets, but it's clearly not filmed in San Francisco. I mean, do we know where it's supposed to take place in the world of the film?
I truly didn't even think about it. Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't even something that crossed my mind.
There's
It crossed my
Spruce
mind for a
Street.
moment.
There's like other stuff, like the bars on Spruce. There's one that's on Post, I think. There's stuff that's on like very specifically San Francisco streets, but there's not one part of the geography that looks anything like it. And
Right.
I know that Teddy is also, at one point he says, we got to get you back up north, or up north, or something up, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I don't know. I'm just trying to put it all together.
I think I just assumed it was LA or like a suburb of LA.
It looks
you
and
know?
feels like Southern California,
Yeah.
and I didn't ever think that they were in San Francisco, but I was like, oh, San Francisco, like, how's that going to play into it? And it never, I only worrying about it because I'm in San Francisco, but like, I didn't actually notice that the street names were San Francisco names.
They're all very clearly San Francisco, but I think
Yeah, that's interesting.
part of it maybe
But
just
it's
be
definitely,
like
not-
the weird, like almost surreality of the setting, right? If it was too
Yeah,
objectively San Francisco, it could be like,
Yeah.
also maybe giving a reason why Teddy's acting so kind of, obviously he wants to downplay the fact that he's a cop, but he's clearly out of his jurisdiction if he's all the way down in LA too, right? So he doesn't want to like pretend like he's being a cop who's,
Right.
not actually able to do his job. And that's another kind of weird thing too, is like, wait a minute, so Teddy is a police officer who's like taking pictures of the guy who just murdered somebody. He's basically photographing a crime. And
He's a
like,
police
kind of becoming an
officer,
accomplice
and
to
yet
it.
a bastard also. It's interesting.
Hold
But I mean,
on.
but like, there's no real reason for him to have photographed Lenny like after he killed the actual John G, right? But it's meaningful
Yeah.
to us to see the picture. Like, it means a lot as an audience. But like on a practical level, there's no good reason for Teddy to have done that. You know what I mean?
No.
I don't know. There's little plot holes, obviously, but you know,
It's just that he's like very sure that he's going to get away with it. Like he says, like, you're so good at killing people, you know, because you're not a murderer. Just the fact that he has this like hitman that works for him that he can manipulate so beautifully that he's just like so unconcerned, and he can have photos and like, I don't know. Police do act with a feeling of that they're like invulnerable, right? Like
Above
that.
the law,
I mean, like just the text messages that from San Francisco, right, that came out of like, you know, police saying horrible things to each other and just like with impunity and not worrying about it. So it's that did not strain my believability register.
ACAB.
I will say, you know, I do feel like he cast this movie based on watching The Matrix and LA Confidential.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like he must have been like, it's very easy to imagine him being big fans of those movies. Like LA Confidential, like the best neo-noir of the 90s probably. And then
I was just about to bring it up because I couldn't even remember as I was just thinking about it if it came out before this or after.
A couple
this.
years before this. And then because I remember because I loved that movie. And
I still love that movie. It's so good.
And so I knew Guy Pearce from that, and that was one of the reasons I like wanted to see this one.
So that was I knew him from Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, also, like, which I think he's so great in. And then he did LA Confidential, and I'm like, oh, look, he's playing like a nerdy dude, you know, and like that kind of blew my mind. And then he did this, and I'm like, dude, Guy Pearce is the guy. He's the Guy Pearce, and he followed this up with Time Machine and Count of Monte Cristo.
Count of Monte Cristo is kind of good.
It's not. It's good, actually. I know, but it was a fail. It is good, though. But, you know, then he kind of disappears. Like, I mean, he's in HBO shows.
He's made kind of smaller roles, too. Like, in The Road, he's kind of the guy at the very end there. He's in a couple, like, more Australian movies, kind of like A24 flicks, I mean, like The Rover movie, and stuff like that. That were
like, the people who were attached to this movie were Brad Pitt was attached to make this movie, and then... I think that was like, if that was going to happen, it would have been a completely different movie because the budget would have been so strained having him on, you know. But when it started, it was him, and then it was going to be Aaron Eckhart, and then Guy Pearce was going to play Two-Face, or I should say Harvey Dent, in The Dark Knight. And then something happened. I don't know what happened, but he ended up dropping out, and then he like got Aaron Eckhart for this, so they kind of flip-flopped, you know. And Aaron Eckhart's great in that movie. I have no problem with that, but like, I wonder if Guy Pearce would have stayed with Nolan and done that movie next, if he would have had a bigger career. Like, I don't know, like, if he dropped out of that to make The Time Machine or something, what a disaster that would have been, or that would be to his life. Maybe not. He's doing fine.
Well, the guy's worked with like every Matrix star ever now at this point. With, you know, he worked with Agent Smith and, you know, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, obviously.
Yeah.
And then of course, you know, Trinity. And I'm just waiting for him, and maybe he'll be in a John Wick 7 or something as the, you know, the homeless king or something.
Lawrence Fishburne need to do something together.
Exactly.
And then of course, you know, The Matrix was like a huge influence on Inception, years and years later. So yeah, anyway, just kind of cool to like, I mean, this cast had like 4 people in it, which I love. I mean, you really can like, it's so much happens, and it's such an ambitious film, and yet it's such a brilliant example of like a filmmaker writing with constraints and writing around constraints and making that work for the story, and getting more out of it. Like, it's pretty inspiring.
I just think it's kind of weird, though, that Alec Baldwin was Christopher Nolan's first choice to play Leonard. A guy who he's never actually worked with.
Wait, what?
Yeah, Alec Baldwin, from what I understand, was his first choice.
You know, the only thing that I can think of that would make that make sense is that Alec Baldwin has such a distinct voiceover voice, and so much of this movie is just Leonard talking to himself.
That's fair.
That, like, I can imagine in those phone scenes having that sort of gruff, like, fucking bullshit. Yeah. You know, like, that makes sense in my mind. If he's looking for a voice more than a performance, then, like, that makes sense, as he would think of him.
Yeah. I'm imagining Guy Pearce now just talking into the phone, and he's like, you're a pig. You're an ugly, disgusting pig. The thing you have to understand about my pig daughter is that she's an ugly pig. Anyway.
Did you guys notice when Leonard passes by the comic book store, there's a Batman logo pretty prominently in the window. Just like
I did. I wrote
Yeah.
it down.
And
That's
just
three. That's
crazy.
2 in a row.
well, because in,
I
in,
gotta-
in following also, don't forget there was the
That's right.
Yeah, I
That's
know.
right.
I
So
wrote
he's
it
like-
down. I'm like, there's got to be one in Insomnia.
setting it
so that
up.
we
This
can
is
get
like-
6 for 6.
This is like
He
a
was
Christopher Nolan
auditioning
movie.
for-
He's giving us all the clues.
I think that's the snowman, Mr. Policeman.
Another weird thing I learned that at the very beginning, right before Teddy, gets shot, he goes, "You don't have a clue, you freak." And then kind of like draws out the freak part. Christopher Nolan himself recorded those last 2 words because he said Joe Pantoliano didn't quite nail it, so he took out the "you freak," and those words you hear him say "you freak" or whatever, however he says it, is actually
That's
Christopher
funny.
Nolan's voice trying to sound like Joe Pantoliano, which is really
Can you-
really fucking funny. I don't know.
And can you imagine like a young Christopher Nolan being like, "I need you to say it again, but really," and just Joe Pantoliano, "No, I said it. I already did the line. We're good. We got it."
Right?
And it'd just be
Right?
like, ugh. We don't have enough money to go any longer, or to like get Joe out of his trailer again for one last take. So
Right.
I keep forgetting to bring this up, but we'll talk. You know what? I'll save it for Insomnia because we'll have less to talk about.
oh
on
my
that
god,
movie.
we just had like a cliffhanger ending from Ian.
I'll just throw this out there, and you guys can read about it if you want to. You know about the third Nolan brother?
No,
Okay, well you can look it up.
I don't
on-
even care about the second one. I'm not going to
Jonah?
Google it, the third one.
It was Jonathan and
well-
his Jonah or something, right?
No, there's Matthew, the oldest
Uh.
brother, who went to jail for murder, and then
Wait.
tried to escape. So yeah, we'll get into
What?
it more in
Oh, wow.
Insomnia.
Okay.
But that I feel like the fact that his older brother is a alleged murderer. He went to
A
basically
convicted murderer?
well, this is what happened. He was a hitman that went to Costa Rica and was torturing somebody and killed them, and then fled to America. And then he was in jail here, but they were going to extradite him to Costa Rica, but the U.S. government didn't want to do that for some reason. They thought that there wasn't enough evidence, and they just didn't want the international. That's a big deal when you do that. So he didn't ever get extradited, and so he was in jail here, and then he tried to escape, and they found him with 14 yards of rope with sheets tied together and like a shiv and all this stuff, and then he got like 14 years after that. So he's in jail for that now, for trying to escape jail. But he's an alleged murderer hitman that like, so I just feel like that being in his family has a lot to do with his fascination with like good guys gone wrong. If it's his brother, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
these kind of
jeez.
guys. So I don't know. I want to get into that more, and I'll read more about it too. I kind of was reading articles this week, or actually before following, I was reading articles. So anyway,
That's crazy.
cliffhanger a bit. but,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, that is very intense. It's weird that you don't hear more about that. Or I've read a lot about Christopher Nolan. I've never read anything about that.
So I think that his family, his brother Jonathan grew up here. He grew up in England. And who knows where Matthew grew up? Like
How
they were a
close they were,
fractured
yeah.
family. So who knows how close they were? And it might just be the kind of thing that like he doesn't know his brother that well. It was this fucked up thing in his family, But who knows? Like I'll try to look into it more too. But
Okay.
yeah, kind of interesting.
Huh.
So what did we
It's
learn?
scary.
What did we learn? Christopher Nolan is like the premier, director of like noir-ish or or realistic kind of like but thrilling and kind of trippy films of the early 2000s. He makes movies that are deeply emotionally resonant, even if he doesn't get credit for it, and with incredible performances from extremely distinguished actors. He is a like an like a what do you call it? Like a naturalist observer of bros and bro culture, and like a scientist examining them. And by the same token, he sort of like is mystified and at a distance from like women. That's another thing that Ian, you talked about a lot in the last movie.
Yeah.
But this female character again is sort of like it's not like we're getting a character that's like, oh, that's not what a woman does. Like this is like you're trying to write from a woman's perspective and you're failing. It's more like, this is a different species. I don't know what drives them. People act in weird ways, and there's like kind of like a that's how I read it. Similar to, and what's film noir women, right? Like that's kind of where you get.
Well, I was gonna say
failure to engage.
Carrie-Anne Moss's performance in this was not, or I should say, the role was not incredibly different from the woman in the following,
right?
Or in following, I should
Correct.
say. It's just that her performance elevates it, so it feels more like a real character, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't feel like a real woman necessarily, but it feels like it could have been any of the other characters in this movie, which is a positive. Like, I don't think that's a negative.
Yeah. And I think somebody who's as analytical as Christopher Nolan and bases everything that he knows on like facts, observable facts, you know, and even as he's questioning, like, again, the phenomenology of like the experience of those facts, I think he can say like, okay, I know this about men. I know men are like this because of my feelings about this and blah, blah, blah. That's how he kind of bases his worldview. And with women, I think he feels like he's missing some component, a bit of information, so he just kind of refuses to engage, and that's why they're treated kind of like these femme fatales and stuff like that. It's funny because her character acts in a really unbelievable way. The way the sex happens between the characters happens in a very unbelievable way, just like in Following, just like in Dark Knight Rises between Batman and Talia al Ghul. Spoiler alert. But also, there's a line in the movie where somebody says, like, my associates are not the kind of people you want to fuck with. And I was like, okay, Christopher Nolan also has no, like, mob connections either. Like, he does not. This is another world that he's just sort of like, you know, they say stuff like this. Don't worry. Like, you know, so whatever his brother was into, I don't think Christopher Nolan has any great insight into that world either. Right. But it works enough for the, you know, again, for the tone of the film.
Well, and as much as I love, what's his name? Falcone in the Batman movies. What's his name? That actor?
Yeah, I know who you mean. They can Google it. Yeah.
Yeah. He's great, and I love that performance. But like, if that's his idea of a mom boss, is that guy who's like.
There's a lot of stuff in Batman Begins that just like does not work because it has just absolutely no recognizable connection to anything in the real world or in like a believable fantasy world. But yeah, I feel like, you know, there's a line in Dark Knight where, you know, the Joker is like, don't pretend you're one of these people, these normal people. Like, you're a weirdo like me. I think Christopher Nolan is not of the world in a way. You know what I mean? He's like a self-made, driven, obsessive weirdo. And like, filmmaking is his kind of obsession. And I think anytime he tries to like paint a picture of the real world, you're like, well, I don't know about that.
But I did appreciate with this movie that like the mathematic part of it, while it was definitely there, obviously, like clearly there, it didn't feel like it overshadowed the movie to me. Like, it was more, the performances were so good that it kind of elevated it above this sort of math trick, you know?
Especially with Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with what's the lady's name? Harriet Sansom Harris.
I
just watched Licorice Pizza. I think I told you guys like a couple weeks ago.
MVP.
She's so good in that movie, and I'm like, oh wait a minute, this is that lady again. She's great. I didn't realize.
Yeah.
Anyway, love that.
I know. You Google her, and she pops up in little roles forever. You know.
Do you guys watch Frasier? I loved her in Frasier. That was like the first thing that I knew her from. She's like steals some scenes in a couple. She's like his agent, and she's evil. But like he like can't fire her because like she's too good at her job. It's really good. She's like actually evil though. I love Frasier. Anyway,
that'll be the name of the episode. I love Frasier.
All right, so should we rank them?
Yeah, Memento and then Following.
All right,
right?
Yep.
I mean, agreed. Times 3.
Done. All right.
That was hard.
Good talk, guys.
Good talk.
God, what a movie.
Yeah, I like this one a lot. All right. Bye.
On that note, see ya.
Thank you for listening to Auteur Detour. We'll see you again next week.